Hi, welcome to the video. With it being a recession, times are particularly difficult at the moment for a lot of people, whether you're struggling to get by or even just struggling to save money in general. So in this video, I want to delve into some of the principles behind saving, how you can maximize your monthly income to save as much as possible, and then I'm going to go into my own personal strategy for how I get the most out of my savings and get the most out of my monthly income so that I'm able to save as much as possible. So let's get into it. So the first principle when it comes to saving money is to get out of debt. Now this video can also be used as a strategy for getting out of debt, but that's not necessarily the underlying goal of the video, but I think a lot of the lessons carry over. So when it comes to debt, you may have got into debt through unfortunate circumstances, or maybe, you're just not being particularly tight or efficient with your spending and you're spending beyond your means. This is one of the first things that needs to be adjusted because ultimately you can't save if you don't have the money to save. So getting out of debt is definitely the priority. And like I said, some of the particular strategies in terms of getting the most out of your salary can help you get out of debt. The second principle, which comes from the psychology of money, and that is that there are two fundamental skills when it comes to managing your finances. The first is the skill to make money, which is surprisingly a lot easier than what most people actually think. And there's a lot of people who have the skill of making money and they can make money very quickly. The problem is that's all well and good, but if you end up burning more money than you're able to generate, irrespective of how much money you generate, then you're not actually saving very much money or at all. You might end up even getting yourself into debt. So it's very important that, you manage the second skill, and the second skill is the skill to keep money. And while, it might not seem like there's a big difference, you can group it all together and say it's all about money, but in reality, not only are they two very different practical skills, but they're actually very different psychological or mental skills as well. The latter skill requires a lot more kind of discipline, good habits, and just structure in general. Whereas the first money, you can earn a lot of money doing things based on impulse, based on excitement, based on inspiration, motivation, and so on. But the second skill is all about how you're able to plan. And that's why there are some people who are excellent at planning and managing their finances and might not even be earning very much in the first place, but they're actually able to save up over a period of a year or several years a lot of money. And you have other people who are have twice the monthly salary of the first person, but because they are not very efficient with their money, they end up burning most of it essentially. So the next principle is to try and save 3 to 6 months of your living expenses and have that kind of stashed as an emergency fund essentially. And it's important both in terms of in case you have an emergency in general and you need to fork out a bunch of money, but also if you end up in a situation where you're out of a job or there's uncertainty or something is unpredictable that's happening in your current life, and to have that money is even peace of mind makes a big difference as well. So the general advice is to first accumulate 3 to 6 months of your living expenses or 6 to 12 months of your living expenses if you are self-employed. Once you've achieved that threshold, then you can really begin to focus on things like investing, whether that's in the stock market or crypto. Probably not a good time for that at the moment, but the principle still stands. And there's many other forms of investment as well. So I think trying to focus on accumulating that threshold of 3 to 6 or 6 to 12 months of living expenses and putting that in a high interest savings account is something that's easily accessible if you need it, but in reality, you're keeping it purely as a what if kind of situation. The next principle is something that I think every financial expert and everyone who is good with their money will tell you, which is you need to save before you spend rather than spend first and save what you have remaining afterwards. It may seem like a small thing, but actually it makes the world a difference, because if you pre-allocate a certain portion of your monthly salary into savings and then treat your remaining balance as this is what I have to spend for the month, you'd be surprised by how much you end up being smart with that remaining balance. Whereas if you kind of blur everything together, it's very easy to kind of cross over into what would have been savings and just treat yourself on a particular day. Whereas if you pre-allocate and say that the first portion is purely for savings and this is what I have to work with, it's much easier to, on a daily basis, get the thing that you wanted, or say, you know what, hold on, I'm going to wait till the following month, or maybe you realize at that point that it's not something that you need in the first place. And the last principle, which sort of relates to the previous one, and it's something that everyone who's good with their money will tell you, and that is you need to create a plan. So this plan can be as minimal or as kind of expansive and complex as you would like, but in reality, having a plan that's going to help stabilize you financially, but also give you a kind of a sense of direction for how your monthly living situation is going to be, I think is definitely very important. Pretty much every wealthy person, everyone who comes from a rich background, accountants, they all would say the same thing, and that this plan will create the structure that you need in order to be able to not only maximize the most of your savings, but do things in terms of allocate the right amount of money for the right types of things, whether it's investments and so on. And in addition, it will help you maintain your direction in terms of where you want to get to, and the trajectory in order to get there will be a lot easier to maintain if you have this plan. So several years ago, I kind of had this mindset where, yeah, I know about plans, it's all well and good, but I think I can kind of wing it kind of thing. But in reality, it's something that I think a lot of people think they can do, but without the plan of really what you're going to spend and how you're going to spend it, it's almost impossible to, maintain the level that you actually wanted to initially get to. It is possible that you can still save money, and you can kind of do that by improvising in the short term what you're going to save, or maybe you have a week where you spent less than you were expecting to, and then you say, oh, I'm just going to put that into savings. But that's going to be far less efficient than telling yourself at the very start how much you're going to put into savings, how much you're allowed to spend in what areas, and so on. And the goal is not to restrict your life in a way that feels like a chore and that I can't do this, I can't do that. It's actually, in a way, more liberating when you know that you're allowed to spend something because you've pre-allocated that amount of money for that purpose. And this could be the same with holidays, savings, monthly budgets for bills, whatever it may be. When you know what you have to spend and what you have left, it's much easier to stay motivated, and you'll find that over a period of time, this becomes like a habit, and you don't even have to think twice because you know how much you're going to spend, how much you're going to save, and what areas need the most in terms of financial priorities. So now I'm going to go into my own specific strategy that I've implemented and I've maintained over the last few years, and I'll break it down in terms of like challenge levels. So the first level being easy, the second being intermediate, and the last being advanced. And what I mean by that is the first level is the easiest to implement and requires the least amount of effort, but the returns are higher in the advanced category. So if you implement the advanced kind of challenge level, then you'll find that your savings is increased or maximized, but it is and requires a little bit more kind of control and effort and time in order to keep that thing going. So that's the trade-off. So I think just choose the one that works best for you. But in my case, I've started off in level 1, and over a period of 1 to 2 years, I've moved towards level 3. And like I said, it takes a little bit more discipline, but like anything, if you do it long enough, you'll end up just doing it out of habit, and that's the place you want to get to in order to make the most you can out of what you earn. The basic idea is that you break down your salary or your monthly incomings into different categories or pots, I guess is another way of looking at it. And in level 1, what you want to do is to create a savings pot or savings account. Ideally, it should probably be a high interest savings account that you can pre-allocate a certain portion of your income into that the second or the day you get paid. So if you get paid on the last day of the month, when you get paid, you decide in advance, and you have to try and be strict with it, how much money you're going to save, and you put that into the savings account immediately, and you almost forget that it even exists. And therefore you then rely solely on your remaining balance to dictate how much money you're going to spend for the rest of the month. So like I said before, it really relies on the principle of save first, spend later, and you'll be surprised how just that one change alone, if you're not already doing it, makes a massive difference. So level 2 is breaking things down even further. So rather than just having a savings pot or a savings account and then having your normal everyday current account, you break things down so that you have different pots, buckets, whatever you want to kind of think of to distinguish categories. And these categories allow you to kind of have more fine control over what areas you're going to spend and how much money you're going to spend in each of those areas. So I think the minimal amount of categories you need to make this work is probably around 3. So I would say you have a bills category, and this will control everything that is your predictable outgoings for the month. So things like utilities, internet, etc. This goes into your bills, and this requires you to know in advance of what you're spending on bills, and this should generally be something that's quite predictable because it should maintain roughly around the same amount each month. It may vary from season to season if you're using more heating and so on, but for the most part, it's something that you can predict with a reasonable amount of accuracy. The next category I would say is fun. Now, this is quite an important one, and I think this is often overlooked, but by giving yourself a fun category or a fun pot, it allows you to be, not dismissive of your own needs, because if you just say, I need to be so controlled with my spending that I'm not allowed to do this or not allowed to do that, then you'll find that you'll resent the strategy in the first place. But if you pre-allocate a certain amount of money and say, this is what I'm allowed to spend on fun, and fun could be anything from holidays to going out to going to restaurants, presents, gifts, whatever it may be, this goes into your fun kind of pot or fun category. Again, this is quite important because if you end up trying to blur the lines between what you use for fun and what you need in terms of daily expenses, it's very easy to delve or flow back and forth and take money that you really had allocated for, basic necessities and end up, using that for fun. Whereas again, if you break it down and have a dedicated category for your fun, you'll be surprised by how much, enjoyment you get from not delving into the wrong pots, but also because you've allocated a certain fixed number to what you can spend for fun, you don't feel guilty when you delve into that or actually spend money that was intended for that purpose in the first place. And of course, we have our savings category, which again, as previously mentioned, should probably be in the form of a high interest savings account to maximize how much you can get from your savings rather than letting it just sit there. And all this leaves then is your default category or default pot. And this should be left solely for the purpose of daily living expenses. So this could be things like food, transport, and so on. Things that you need in order to survive, I would say, outside of bills. This goes into this. And by keeping that separate, again, like from things like fun, bills, it really helps you hone in on what areas you spend the most, and it allows you also to be a lot more fine with your control on how much you save, which is ultimately the purpose of this. And level 3, which is the pro or advanced level of challenge for those who want to save the most they can. And this really relies on the principle of breaking things not down into more categories, although that works too, but breaking things down in terms of time. So rather than seeing everything as one massive monthly kind of pool of finances for the month, instead, if you break things down into like a weekly schedule, you'll find that managing things weekly ends up resulting in even more gain in terms of your monthly savings. So the way I like to implement this is that I have my default pot, as previously mentioned in level 2, but this is how much I'm allowed to spend for that particular week. And then what I do is I have another pot or another category for remaining monthly balance, essentially. And every week I will transfer, or if you just keep things in budgets, that's totally fine too, over to your weekly default pot. And this allows you to say, this is how much money that I'm allowed to spend on my living expenses and basic necessities for the week. And again, you can take this a step further and have like a weekly fun pot as well. And what some people tend to do is, if you spend less than what you were planning to, then you can push the remaining balance for that into next week's either default pot or even next week's fun pot. And that gives you an incentive as well to save as much money as you can. So by being more meticulous and kind of rigid with your spending on a weekly basis, you reward yourself the following week, and you'll find that it gives you that motivation to save while also making it a fun process along the way. And that's pretty much it for this video. So remember that saving is not something that's reserved just for high net earners. It's something that everyone can apply. Essentially, it's a set of core principles and habits that you can implement. And once you've got there, you'd be surprised by how much money you can save, irrespective of how much money you earn. And that's really the goal of this. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.